I was born in Norwich, New York, 1931. Graduated in high school in 1951. Enlisted in the Marine Corps right after I received my diploma. I pre-enlisted 6 months prior, but they wouldn't take me till I had a diploma in my hand. Once I got the diploma, I got shipped to Parris Island. My dad was a mechanic. My mother worked in a knitting mill. They were both immigrants to this country from Italy. When my dad came over, he was 18 years old. He enlisted in the army. He was sent to France. He was wounded in action in France, came back. That gave me the incentive to enlist in the Marine Corps when I graduated. I still remember my dad when I used to take him to the VA hospital in Syracuse for a checkup. The doctor would ask my dad, "How long have you been this way, Mr. Archie?" And he would say, "Ever since the Red Cross pulled me out of the trenches." That was his answer to the doctor, and he never got asked that again. Yeah, I had a stepbrother who was in the Air Force. He was deceased at 93 years old. He worked with the CIA. He was aerial photograph interpreter for the CIA. I followed the Marines in the newspaper and in the TV and all the advertisement when they were landing on these different islands. And I guess it just inspired me. I figured if I could make it in the Marine Corps, I could make it in life. Well, yes, I was an aircraft. I went to Jacksonville, Florida Naval Air Station. I put 6 months in there, graduated from there, and then I went to Memphis, Tennessee Naval Air Station and put 6 months in there. And there I was promoted to corporal. Then I went on a 30-day leave, and I was sent out to California, El Toro Air Base. There I was in charge of the 21st replacement draft. I was checking the guys as they come in. I was checking them off and assigning them to their bunks where they were supposed to stay until we got ready to ship out of San Diego. I was happy. I wanted to go to Korea. And that's what I enlisted for, is to go to Korea. That was my basic initiative, or I'd say desire. And the Marine Corps satisfied that desire. And then after I shipped out of San Diego, there was on the troop ship, the John Pope, the USS Pope. There was probably a couple thousand Marines that shipped out, went out when I left. When I went there, the only thing I knew was when I was on board ship, before we got to Korea, there was someone there, a historian or someone that knew Korea, the background, and they hold meetings so we could listen to what they said, how Korea got to be there, how it started, how the war started. We landed in Yokohama, then from Yokohama by train to Kyoto, Japan. And from Kyoto they flew me into Seoul Air Base in Korea. And from there by truck to the Ascom City, which was our rear echelon. And from the rear echelon, then after about 4 months, I was sent to the forward echelon, where we operated closer to the lines. It was on the reverse slopes. The main line of resistance was probably a mile from us. And you could hear when they were firing artillery and stuff like that. You were that close. Back then, they used those F-80s, the first jet planes, and that was the first real combat that the jets had was in Korea. Ted Williams, the baseball player, was a pilot in the Marine Corps. And he was there at the same time that I was there in Korea, and he was flying. We used to pick up wounded and fly them to out in Incheon Harbor, the Repos. It was a Swedish hospital ship. From there, then we come back to our base, and when we did fly back then, we didn't have GPSs. We went by eyesight, At times I wondered why the blades didn't hit the trees, because you just fly and just what you see, you're at. But today in the modern helicopters, they got GPSs and everything, radar and everything, so they know where they're going. We were strictly compass back then. And it's amazing how we knew where we were going. I'll be honest with you, the pilots did a good job. As being a crew chief, I'm sitting in the lower compartment, and I had the door open. I could see where we were going, you know, and everything. And I wonder, I could see the trees blowing from the helicopter blades swirling. And I was thinking, man, if we hit one of those trees, it's goodbye. The thing that I really enjoyed was we used to go to the Truce Talks, and we took turns flying in. My turn was when I went in with Admiral Joy to the Truce Talks at Panmunjom. And every time he'd come back, he'd be disgusted because the Chinese wouldn't agree to the terms of the truce. They were stalling. That's when they were fighting on outposts Vegas, Carson, and Reno. One night the Marines would take the hill, the next night the Chinese would take the hill. That's the way the three outposts turned out. It was a bargaining thing where the Chinese were trying to get the upper hand to get more concessions in the truce talks. And eventually then Eisenhower got elected. He come over, and I really think that the Chinese and the Russians who were backing the North Koreas at that time were a little bit worried about Eisenhower. They knew he wasn't going to put up with any nonsense. That's when they started talking sincerely about signing the truce. There was one general there from the Second World War, and he took over for MacArthur when Truman fired him. And I'm trying to think of his name. He always had a grenades strapped to his vest, and he was a real good general. He's the one that really instrumented the stopping on the 30th parallel, where he stopped the Chinese from advancing. The biggest thing that they agreed to the truce was due to the fact that at that time Joseph Stalin died. So Russia was hurting for money, and they were financing the war in Korea at that time. And then after they were financing, the Chinese came in. That's when the Marines were in the Chosin Reservoir. And they were surrounded there in the reservoir because the intelligence told them that there was no Chinese there, but they were there. They were outnumbered, the Marines, probably 1,000 to 1. There was, I don't know how many divisions of Chinese against one Marine division. And they fought their way out of the Chosin Reservoir back to Hungnam, and then they established the 38th parallel, which was a trench warfare, basically what is left there today. And that strictly is now straight across. And they followed the parallel is what they did. And they still have, Panmunjom is still there, and there was a little village there that they had set up, they called it Freedom Village, where they had the prisoner exchange. The prisoners would come in there and they'd exchange prisoners. That was at the end of the war in 1953. I wasn't there for the main battle of Seoul. I was there after it was captured. And there was really nothing there. When I was there, it was just mud huts, dirt roads, muddy roads. And my son-in-law went there about a year ago. He was in the Army, he was a colonel, to check the main line of resistance, and he told me, he says, Seoul is like Miami. He says, you would never believe it. He says, the airport's the most beautiful airport he's ever seen. So they have really developed since that war. Well, basic letters I used to get was from my mother and father and the girls back home that I used to go with. And I just used to write and tell them what I was doing, you know, just a short letter, just letting them know that I was okay and not to worry, basically. There wasn't much correspondence other than I sent a lot of pictures home, stuff like that, to my mom so she could see what was going on and to my brother. I left there in '52. We sailed into San Francisco. That's when all the time I went out there and came back, I never cried or got sentimental. But when we came back underneath the Golden Gate Bridge, that's when tears came to the eyes, because you say, well, I made it back, And then there was a band there at the dock that welcomed us back. But that was it. There was no more welcome after that. Basically, after that, you would see signs on the grass, Marines and dogs keep off. I mean, that was the attitude back then. But since then, it's been different. People have made amends, and they thank you for your service. It's been a terrific turnaround, which I'm really thankful for. It's a great country, and I was glad that I was able to serve it to the degree that I did. And the only time that I have a problem, even today, is like Memorial Day. Things like that. I think back about my friend that I have his pictures there in my book, album. We both were together in high school. We went out on dates together. We went out to football games. We played football together and things like that. And we grew up together. And our families knew each other. I went in the Marines about 4 or 5 weeks ahead of him. And I met him in boot camp. I was graduating and he was still going through training. I feel that other ones that didn't make it back, I feel that I'm representing them. Not me. I'm just fortunate that God's kept me alive and brought me this far. But I think a lot about the ones that didn't make it. And every time I put this uniform on or do anything, or go to a funeral, the Marine Corps League, I think of the ones that didn't make it back. In my opinion, we received a lot of, I would say, compliments in that particular war, because it wasn't in vain like the other ones. So we saved the South Korea. They manufacture Kia, which is one of the main cars here. They built plants in this country. They're giving us money. They supply our goods to us. LNG, refrigerators, and Hyundai builds cars. So we did accomplish something in Korea. If we didn't go over there and defend them at that time, we'd be living with Russian-made Hondas and Kias. Such is, they developed a good industrial base. Samsung is a big company. Computers, all from Korea. And it was all done with the Americans saving the South Korea during the Korean War. That was never settled. It was strictly a truce even till this day. There was never an official end to the war. There hasn't been a war since Korea that we really won and got back. And everything else we've had, Vietnam, the only thing we did there is have a lot of our young boys killed, which we never received anything for that. We're paying for all of that. We didn't receive nothing back from it. We defended them, but it's just like Afghanistan and Iraq right now. We're supplying them. We're paying all the bills. We're not getting any. The only thing we're doing is allowing them to have some freedom, which is great. But the American people are picking up the cost to all this. But Korea was, to me, was not a forgotten war. That was one that really accomplished something. But these other ones, as far as I'm concerned, that's all it did is kill off a lot of the young people. I went to Washington to the memorial, the World War II, the Korean Memorial, and that's when you start thinking when you're watching those memorials. And I was standing there at the Korean Memorial, and there was a lot of people around there, and they couldn't understand why these statues were all separated. It was a skirmish line, they call it. And so I began explaining to a couple what a skirmish line was, the purpose of it and everything, and I assumed a crowd of about 20 people surrounded me because they heard me explaining what the skirmish line is, explaining what the statutes, why they were separated and such. And the skirmish line is basically a separation between the Marines. So you're not standing directly behind one, because if there's firing going, you can go through one and hit the other. So if you're separated with space between, you establish a skirmish line, which sort of prohibits a double killing if there is. This was really got me is when we came back from Washington, we were at the regional airport in Fort Myers. It was 1 o'clock in the morning. I couldn't believe it. There was 1,000 people there waiting to greet us. I was really amazed. That's when you start thinking, you know, see, things have changed. It wasn't like back then when we were in the service or Vietnam. People are more conscious of the servicemen today than they ever been. The message I would like to leave personally, I think that every young man should have at least 2 years in the service. I said just for their own well-being. Not that I want them to get injured or anything, but it's a great experience. You'll learn a lot, and I think if it wasn't for the Marine Corps, I wouldn't be capable of taking care of myself. Here I am, 85 years old. Everything that I learned at boot camp, of taking care of, I'm doing it now because I don't have a wife, so I go back to what I learned in the Marine Corps. And habits, here's one particular habit that I carried back home. In the Marine Corps, whenever you got done in the bathroom with your sink or shaving, you'd always polish the faucets. And we did that. We had to keep them clean so the next individual. So at home I do the same thing. After I get done with the kitchen dishes or anything, I'm always polishing the chrome faucets or the sink. It's got to be shining, you know. I've had a diversified career, as you might call it. 3 separate careers, which you don't usually have. And I was fortunate that I lived this long. I thank God that I made it.